Hello everyone and welcome to the Hidden Lives of Writers. I'm Fiona Snyckers and I'm joined by my co-host Gail Schimmel.
Hi Fiona.
Hi Gail, how has your writing week been?
It's been very interesting because, I talked about stopping and rereading. I think last week I talked about that. So I was stuck and I needed to reread. And I did my reread and then I needed to move on and find the way to move on. And I sat on it for a bit, and thought about it. And I asked myself the question, at what point in what you've reread did you last feel excited about the story? And I found this a chapter ending where I'd been like, oh, nice idea. And on my original plan for the book, that, oh, nice idea was a complete red herring. Mm-hmm. And I thought, what if that's not a complete red herring? And I've added another layer to the plot as a result of that. It's a layer I'm excited about. It's a layer that I think is clever. It's a layer that's going to allow me more twists because I'm trying to write a twisty thriller. And I'm very, very excited about it. And I'm very pleased with the way that rereading process did actually lead to an outcome. Because, sometimes you do it and then the only thing that's different at the end is you've reread. You aren't actually any further along. But this time it really worked. And I like that idea of asking oneself, when last was I excited? What was the last thing I wrote that excited me? Mm-hmm. So I've had a good week. What about you?
I've had to do something that doesn't come very naturally to me. I've spoken before about being a bit of a slasher and burner and someone who's liable to cut many thousands of words off my manuscript. And that's the kind of space that I'm comfortable in, paring down, cutting back, getting down to the essence or trying to make it shine by cutting stuff away. And in this book, I've had to, on the advice of an early reader, add stuff in where there actually wasn't enough detail. And I found that I'm much more comfortable taking stuff out than I am with adding stuff in. Mm. And those bits where I've added in always read back to me as slightly artificial. I can see where something's been shoehorned into place. And then it's quite difficult to smooth it out. So it feels as though it was meant to be like that all along. Can you relate at all?
Absolutely. I find in my writing, I'm quite good at a segue. So each thing segues into the next. And then when you've got to add, you mess up your segue.
Yes.
And that, I find that very, very difficult. I'm not good at adding. And I often have a fantasy that I'm going to be a writer who adds. So I think I will come back and I will add smell and touch. I'll add the senses, I think. Mm-hmm. And then I go back and but the segue is so smooth. I don't want to mess with it. In fact, I read that James Patterson, I hope I'm getting this right. I think it's James Patterson, wrote his first book thinking I will write the story and then I'll come back and add all the detail and the beauty and the scenery and the feelings. And he did it. And then when he read back, he was, you know what, I actually quite like this book without all the extra thing. And that's how he came to his very sparse, very plot-driven style.
Yes, with the short chapters and the plot just hurtling along. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, that is definitely where I'm comfortable. And to know that there's stuff left hanging and stuff unexplained and I actually need to go back and add things in is difficult. But just because something's difficult doesn't mean that it shouldn't be done. So.
And sometimes it results in the most enjoyable writing, that when you find the way in, you actually have a lot of fun.
Yeah. No, you're right. So I'm trying to have a good attitude towards this. And what have you been consuming this week?
Fiona, do I really have to admit it? Should I? I'm sitting here considering lying to you and giving you a deeply intellectual answer from the past, but I'm going to be honest about this week. I have barely read this week because I have become obsessed with a TV program that I cannot even watch. You know how Facebook gives you snippets of things.
Yes.
And in the normal course of events, you could then go and watch the thing on Netflix. But Facebook has decided that it's going to tell me about a program called Married at First Sight. And not just Married at First Sight, which is clearly from the title, we know absolute crap. Married at First Sight Australia.
Oh my goodness.
Facebook has got the whole southern hemisphere, obviously, is just one place. Never mind, Africa's a country, the southern hemisphere is a country. And I somehow, through the little snippets it's shown me, have become obsessed with the happy stories. So it's for those who don't know, it's about couples who only meet each other at a wedding ceremony. The lawyer in me is like, that can't be a legal wedding ceremony, and how does this work? And no. But at what appears to be a wedding ceremony, I'm sure there's some legal art, and they meet each other, and then the program follows their course. And you have some couples who are terrible from the beginning, and you can see they look at each other and there's no attraction and it's all dreadful, and they're all kind of dodgy people. And then there are couples who look at each other and you can see the spark is there. And I've become obsessed with the two particularly happy stories in this, and I want to know how they end. I'm not clever enough to be able to stream it with a VPN on my laptop. I can't do that. Mm-hmm. So I'm watching like a mad person, scrolling through social media, trying to find snippets of Married at First Sight Australia. I promise you next week I will be a more intellectual person. Please tell me you can balance me out in this.
I just want to know, is there any lesson there for us as writers? What is it about these narratives that is so compelling? Is it the knowledge that they are real life, that they actually are happening? Or is there just something compelling about the story that we could take a lesson from?
That is a very, very good question. Picturing yourself in it, I think that's for me with reality TV, that's often a thing. Mm-hmm. Like obviously I'm not going to be on a program called Married at First Sight. I'm married. Mm-hmm. And I would never ever do that. And also I'm 51. Although there are older people in the program, but, I do a lot of like, oh, what if that was me? And what if so that, and maybe that's a lesson, get your reader into that place. And then I think that the idea that something this really objectively terrible might be resulting in somebody's happily ever after. I think I quite like that meet cute rom-com aspect of it. And that's why I'm invested in the happy story.
Yes.
Also, in one of the happy stories, there's a very tall man and I have a very tall husband. So maybe I'm over-relating to that. I don't know. Quickly, Fiona, jump in and intellectualize this podcast.
Okay, well, I have been reading a fairly intellectual book. It's The Ghost of Sam Webster by Craig Higginson. And it really worked well for me, especially in contrast to another work of historical fiction that I've been reading that I won't name, that is not working for me. And I've been thinking, now why is Craig's book successful and that other one not? And I think it's because Craig has dual timelines. Okay. There's a modern day timeline and then there's a historical timeline, and he sort of weaves the two of them together, and you're not always sure how they relate. And then it's interesting to see how they do relate to each other. And there's a sense that the stakes are higher because there is this present day story that you are invested in. Whereas the pure historical fiction, it's such a grim and bleak part of South Africa's past that I feel as though no good can have come out of that time period. And I'm very much getting the feeling that no good will come out of it in this particular story. And I don't know, unrelenting bleakness and the knowledge that everything is going to end badly is difficult for me to get excited about. I know that this book has some very fervent admirers, but do you understand what I mean? Books that make you feel bleak?
I understand about the bleakness, but what I'm understanding more, you've seen, I've just been paging through my notes because I'm trying to see, have we talked about the new Jodi Picoult, by any other name?
What's it about?
It is about Shakespeare being a woman.
Okay, I'm not sure if
I don't think we've
read
talked
a review of it, but I don't think we've talked about it.
So that uses a dual timeline. And it's interesting because I think you are more invested because of the dual timeline. I think that's a very interesting observation you've made, that use of a present story feels more urgent to the reader and makes the past story relevant
and matter
more. And I wonder what it is about us. And I wonder if it's maybe the same kind of thing that makes me obsessed with Marriage at First Sight. Maybe we've actually been doing the same sort of thing. That feeling of immediacy.
Yes.
It's very interesting. But I think we're going to save a talk about that, Jodie Picoult, for another day.
Okay. Well, someone who writes very immediate stories centered in the present, in contemporary South Africa in a very gripping way, is our guest today. Our guest today is Terry-Ann Adams. Terry is the author of the novel Those Who Live in Cages, which was published by Jacana in 2020. Also the short story collection, White Chalk, published in 2022, also by Jacana. White Chalk won the NIHSS Best Fiction Award for Short Stories and the South African Literary Awards Nadine Gordimer Prize for Short Stories as well. Terry, it's such a pleasure to be chatting to you. Hi and welcome.
It's so great to be here. Hi, I'm so excited.
Terry, we're going to jump right in and ask you, how was your writing week?
I had to submit a short story for my thesis on Monday, so my writing week was hectic, a lot of editing over the weekend just to get it perfect. And I think I'm exhausted now.
I think I already have 5 questions coming out of just that one sentence. So, Fiona, do you want to have a turn at a question before I have my 5 from that sentence?
Well, should we go back to the beginning, your origin story as a writer? Have you always written as far back as you can remember, or is it something that you came to as an adult? Can you tell us a bit about your writing journey?
Sure. So I started writing when I was 6. Yeah, I was 6. It was mainly like rapping and stuff like that, because that was like the 90s, and it was like Tupac and Biggie, and I imagined myself I was going to be a rapper. So I started freestyling, and I had a stage name. It was a whole thing. And then I went to school, and I started doing like little poetry stuff. So I've been writing all through my teens, and then when I got to university, I started formalizing my writing journey, and so I've always been writing.
And in terms of what you studied and the career path you saw yourself taking, did you always want to be a writer and know that that's what you were going to do? Or did you, like many of us, try to have another career?
So I currently have another career.
Okay, yes.
But I did my honors in history. So I always thought I was going to do like academia, or I was going to work in a museum, and then I couldn't find a job. And my mom was like, well, you're unemployed, and you write, so write a book and stop being depressed. So, that's how Those Living Cages was born, because I had to do something while looking for a job. And then I went on my normal career path, which is what I do today, and then also my writing career.
And what is it that you do today?
So I'm a digital content manager in corporate, which is so different.
I remember you mentioned to me once before that you occupy the kind of diversity space in your corporate. You are responsible for encouraging diversity awareness in your corporate life. And I just want to know, since this huge change that has happened in America and the way it has trickled through to basically everywhere else
you're
in
just
the world.
Jumping right into the difficult stuff.
Has there been a change in atmosphere that you've noticed in the corporate world with this sort of push to get rid of all diversity initiatives, or have we been spared that in South Africa?
I think we've largely been spared that in South Africa. I think diversity, inclusion, equity and belonging is very big in terms of the world corporate conversation. I was in Canada last year for the One Young World Conference, where quite a lot of corporates send their young people who are change makers in sustainability and diversity and inclusion. And from the biggest ones internationally to the smaller ones in country, everybody is kind of focused on that belonging and equity part. So I'm glad it hasn't come to South Africa yet.
And you haven't noticed this backlash, this sudden resistance, or people kind of triumphantly saying, oh, we don't need to do that anymore?
I think people are very scared of being seen as bigoted. Mm-hmm. So they'll maybe say it in their private spaces, or they'll say it at the braai at home, but they know at work, the way our labor laws are set up, you can't just go out and say stuff because, we have very sort of strong anti-discrimination labor legislation in South Africa.
Okay.
Let's go from there. You identify as a member of various different spaces that are minority spaces. Can you describe for us which spaces they are, which spaces you identify as part of?
So, I was assigned female at birth, and obviously I'm female presenting, which means a lot of people will have woman, prejudices against me. I'm also queer, I'm gender non-binary, and I'm disabled, and I'm a color person. So yeah, I'm sort of like at the bottom of all the intersections. But, I think I sit at the crossroads at quite a lot of intersections in terms of lived experience, and it provides for a rich life, but also you kind of see people's bigotry at every corner and sort of where it intersects and how it intersects. Yeah.
So you are doing the MA in creative writing at WITS at the moment. Is that right?
Yes, I am.
Okay. And you went into that already having published 2 books and having won awards for one of your books. Why did you feel the need, in a way, to go back to school to that degree? And what has it taught you? Because I also remember you saying to me in the past that this MA is showing you flames. So can you break it down for us? What flames is it showing you?
Big ones. I've always loved academia. I tell people like my university years were the best years of my life because I love learning. And I always wanted an MA. And I decided creative writing because as much as I've written and I've been awarded for it, I never took myself seriously as a writer because I don't have a writing degree. So I was like, no, I want to go and do this. And I think I had an idea of what it was going to be when I went into it, and it was not that.
What was the idea and what's the reality?
I was like, no, it's going to be easy. I've written before. I'm just going to, smash it. And, then I went and did an MA with how old was he when we started when he was 4. And so I did it with a 4-year-old and a job. And also it's quite grueling because you have people commenting on your work every time you submit a piece of work. So I had to get used to taking constructive feedback. Cause as writers, we're very sensitive about what we put out there. And when someone comes and says, no, you can do it better, or no, this is, that is the biggest ego hurdle to get over. And then it's also writing on a schedule. Cause I was very used to like writing when the inspiration hits me, but, no, I can't do that now. So now I'm learning how to write for a deadline, which I think is very nice. And it's helping me like move forward. So yeah, very flammable, but it's also very like a good learning curve for me.
And are you finding as it goes on that you are better able to take that criticism? Or is it hurting just as much every time?
I think because you can dish it to others, it's getting easier to take it. And the criticism is always, given in love, and it's always like really good points. And when you read back, and it's made me read my old work and be like, oh, I could have said this better, or oh, this could have been. It's actually made me look at my old work and see how I can improve on my old writing, and it's made me a better reader. Cause now I can read other people's work and be able to look at the mistakes or the flaws or see where it could have been done better, or, give, more nuanced commentary on others' work instead of just, reading for enjoyment.
What were your biggest sins as a writer that you now are becoming aware of and are working to change? We always like to hear about that.
I love first-person narration.
Yes.
Man.
Is that a sin? Isn't that good?
It became a sin because it became a crutch.
Okay.
Because my thing was, I'm writing in the voice of the people. Yay. And it was great. And then one of my lecturers was like, why are all your stories in first person narration? Because what ends up happening with my short stories is they then become like 1,500 words, 2,000 words, because I'm not really doing a lot of like character building or even world building because I'm doing first person narration. And, now I've learned to like lean into something I feared a lot, which was third person narration and overuse of dialogue. Because I always felt like, when you write a lot of dialogue, it's like you're writing a play. So now I know how to like weave it in and make it more natural and write more about my community in different ways. Yeah.
I wanted to ask about those who live in cages and the first person narration and the multiple points of view. One of those points of view is the place, El Dorado Park. It has a voice. It has a sort of first person presence in the novel. The novel is sandwiched by 2 points of view where the place itself speaks to us. What inspired you to do that? And how easy was it to occupy the voice of a place?
So I did the first draft and sent that off to the publisher, and Elders was sort of just a setting. And when my publisher came back to me, she was like, oh my gosh, this is a place that nobody really knows quite a lot about. And your characters are living in it in less stereotyped ways. So when you go back and do the edit, why don't you give the place more of its own voice and its own presence? And I worked through that. And first what I did is I wrote its own little, because the book is divided in like different characters and they have their own monologues, and I was like, okay, this is Aldo's and it has its own monologue. And then I read it back and I was like, that's tacky. And I was like, wow. Went back and I weaved it into the narrative. And I think it was easy for me because I grew up in Aldo's and I knew its smells and its streets, and I lived in it. I wasn't just, in my house the whole time. And as much as I loved living there, I also understood the pitfalls of living in a township and all of those different nuances about how it can be good, but it's also bad. And so, yeah, it was a bit easy to write about it, but I had to do some rewrites just so that it's not tacky.
Now, your first book came out during COVID.
Yes.
And that's quite a thing. I had a COVID book. You had a COVID book, didn't you? And COVID books are a different experience. Were you writing during, you must have been finished writing by COVID. How did that COVID impact that journey, do you think?
So, we were supposed to go out in April with the book, and then COVID hit March, and we were supposed to do it for homebrew, with exclusive books. And then, the publisher was like, oh, we can only publish, a certain amount of books because of all of the cutbacks. And I was one of the cutbacks. And then, it was just like, oh my gosh, my book is never going to come out because, a lot of businesses went through, difficulties during COVID, but they believed in the story so much that they were willing to debut a new writer within that very difficult time. And we came out in October, and we had time then to do a hectic marketing push, and we even did pre-sales and a whole thing, and so that by the time the book came from the printers, it already had sold quite a number of copies. So yeah, it was a COVID book, but it's still my best-selling book.
And maybe in a funny way made them put more into the marketing than they would have put in otherwise.
Yeah, definitely.
Very interesting.
And what did those COVID years do for you as a writer? That thing of not going out to work, but sort of being stuck at home. Did it change the way you wrote or thought or saw yourself as a writer?
It really influenced how I wrote my second book because I had all that time at home, and I moved from the middle of Joburg to the West Rand, which is way more quieter. And my mom was living with us and she could look after my son. So which meant I had way more time for writing than I had in the past. And I could actually finish White Chalk in 3 to 4 months.
Wow.
There with Those Living Cages, it took me like 3 years because of all the things that was just happening around me. So I cherish the lockdown time because nobody wanted me to go with them anyway. So that was nice. It got me to like really sit and write and think about my writing and spend more time on editing actually as well.
I'm very interested in this idea that White Chalk took you 3 months. Now, I can imagine writing a novel in 3 months. I don't particularly want to, but I can imagine doing it. I cannot imagine writing a collection of short stories in 3 months because each story requires a different idea and a different approach and a different nuance. How did you have so many ideas in 3 months?
Short story a week.
Really?
So yeah, I went for like a short story a week. I had already 2 that I had written prior that I submitted to my publisher just because she wanted to see if I can write short stories. And after she saw those 2, she was like, okay, cool, like, will you write about it? And then I thought of a theme.
Okay.
And at that time it was like memory, like how we construct memory as a community. And then I was like, okay, let's look at different things and different ways we construct memory and then it just came 1 story a week.
And how is that finding of ideas for you? I mean, I know it's our worst question as writers. I go to the tree in the backyard and I pick an idea off it. But short stories, I'm particularly interested in that. Do you play around with different ideas and then one sticks, or does it just come to you as a fully formed egg and you're like, this is my story? How does that idea process feel to you?
So it's been so much different now because for my master's thesis, I'm writing a short story collection again.
Okay.
And I've actually changed the golden thread of this collection so many times because I keep thinking of ideas. And at first it started out as, I want to do like a fictionalized version of my family's memories. Because my family is a bunch of storytellers and we've got a bunch of stories that have just been part of the canon. And then it was so difficult to pick the memories to then fictionalize. And then I had to change it. And so, yeah, for me, it's once I find that golden thread.
Okay.
Then I can start formulating things that weave around it. Yeah.
So your advice to a short story writer or wannabe short story writer would be to find that theme. Don't just go wild and write every story that's in your head. Find a theme and write around that theme.
Yeah, especially if you're doing a collection.
Okay.
And I think I've always struggled to get into like journals and stuff, because I can never write for someone else's theme. But if it's like that Inception thing, like if it's your idea, you're more likely to believe in it and then you're more likely to execute. So yeah, if you're doing a collection, find a golden thread because nobody likes reading a disjointed collection. But don't also overdo the theme because then it can sometimes become like an album where all the songs sound the same. So yeah, it's finding that balance as well.
When I read your work, I recognize aspects from your real life, things that I know are somehow connected to your real life. Do you see what you do as a form of life writing, or do you see it as fiction?
I think it is a combination of the two. I think I always try to reflect real life experiences in a fictionalized way. And I think that's what makes it more authentic. Cause sometimes when you're reading, cause even if you're writing sci-fi or, magical realism, if it's not based in some sort of lived experience, it can come off very phony. So I always try to draw from the well of my own life experiences, but also of like people in my community, things that I've heard. So like I said, my family is a well of storytelling. So some of the stories that get told at home, to try and make it more authentic.
And, you talk about members of your community and members of your family and so on, and that you are somehow channeling their stories. Have you ever had blowback where someone has recognized themselves in a story and not been thrilled about the way you portrayed them? Have you ever had any kind of feedback from people like that?
I always just, okay, you use my story. Where's my money? When am I getting paid? That's always what they ask me. But no blowback. Just they want royalties. That's all.
and then you explain to them that you could share your royalties and they'd get about R3. And
always. They always get surprised.
I want to unpack that authenticity of voice. You belong to, like we've touched on, you belong to a lot of different communities. You belong to the coloured community. You belong to the queer community. You're a person with albinism. And one of the things I said, I saw you also identify as autistic.
Yes.
Okay. So these are a lot of different voices. How strongly do you feel the pressure of representing all those different communities in your writing, or is it irrelevant to you?
I used to feel a lot of pressure to represent the communities properly. Because like I said, I write from a place of personal experience. So I find sometimes, like, I can write white characters, it's not like I can't, but I always feel like, maybe it's going to come off weird, or maybe it's going to come off stereotypy. So I would then have my friend read it and be like, would this be representative of your community? So for me, the pressure is more about writing about other people's communities and other characters than of my own community. I think that's where, I really feel nervous that I'm doing those communities an injustice. Yeah.
Okay. That leads very much. I was telling Fiona about an experience I had. So in one of my books, I wrote a character who was a side character. He was a Ugandan gay man with albinism. So I had this character, and he's quite a fun character. The book was published in South Africa fine, and then I got an international deal, and my English copy editor attacked me for it and said, you don't talk about anybody else's race. You don't talk about anybody else's disability. Why are you highlighting it for him? What's your reaction to that?
For me, you can't run away from the things that make us us. I was listening to one of the more really prominent international activists at the same One Young World conference, and he's like, oh, you guys are all obsessed with identity, because there was a flag bearing ceremony. And it's like, oh, you guys are all obsessed with identity and with your flags and no. And I was like, that's not something you can run away from, because look at the climate we are in right now in terms of fascism getting, an upstart. And the first thing that fascism tells us is, oh, you mustn't focus on your unique identity, because we must all be the same. And that's where you give room, coerced consent, to stuff like that, to things that want to take away your individuality. So I think as authors, as writers, we shouldn't try and create this colorblind world, because we're fitting into that idea that everybody must be the same.
Do you feel comfortable with a white woman who knows nothing of these challenges writing a character like that as a side character? I don't think I would ever try and write it as a main character, but as a side character, do you think that's adding to the diversity of voices, or do you think that's stepping into someone else's lane? And you can be harsh with it.
No, I think if things are well researched, and if it's like if you know someone that has albinism and you're like, oh, can you just give this a read? My husband's currently writing a graphic novel, and his main character has albinism. And he's writing it from the perspective of having been with me for 12 years.
Yes.
So, but he still gets me to read some of it so that you can make sure that it stays true to the first person experience. So there's a lot of, I think they call them sensitivity readers. I hate that term, but there's a lot of people who can always look over the work and be like, oh, no. As long as the work is well researched and well respected. One of my favorite stories about that has an albinotic character is written by Keletso Mopai, and she doesn't have albinism in her short story collection. And it's a beautiful portrayal of the inner struggle of a person with albinism and the way that they look at relationships and dating. And she doesn't have albinism, but it's not a fake stereotyped portrayal. Yeah.
Okay.
how do you feel about writing as a way of working out traumas on the page, of kind of rewriting things that have happened with maybe a better or more satisfactory ending, or putting the pain unfiltered on the page, writing as a form of therapy? Is it something that you consciously embrace, or that you try to stay away from? What is your relationship with that kind of writing?
So I did that a lot for White Chalk, and a lot of the stories in White Chalk was sort of that writing as therapy. The first story in White Chalk was me retelling my journey with a stillbirth. And I don't think I'll ever do that again. It was, yes, like after I finished White Chalk, and especially in the short period of time, that I wrote it in, when I was done there, I had to actually start going to therapy. Because now it was like, okay, you've put all of these really traumatic experiences on the page. Now you actually have to face them and deal with them. So writing in that way, writing introduced me to therapy. And I'm a therapy person now.
Yay, therapy people. Yeah. I'm finding that very interesting, because we tend to almost stereotype writing as the therapy, whereas in fact writing can be the thing that undoes you, that pokes the hornet's nest and actually leaves you almost psychologically worse off than before you started writing.
Yeah, no, definitely. Because what you don't realize you're doing is you're remembering as you're writing, and you then start feeling those things all over again. And it's almost immersive, and it can feel like hypnosis even, because now you're taking yourself back there. And I don't do alternative endings. And some of my stories that I write or used to be like very traumatic. Like, the second story in White Chalk was based on the killing of Nathaniel Julies by police officers. And as I was writing that story, it was just like, this boy was killed because he has Down syndrome. And it made me think about ableism in general and how the law deals with ableism. And yeah, that's like very difficult. I think my neurodivergent self just immerses myself in all of these pieces I put together. And yeah, no, I can't write without going to therapy anymore.
You also, as you've mentioned, occupy different points of view in your writing. You will speak in the unfiltered voice of a whole range of characters. How do you slip between those consciousnesses? Because many of them are very different to each other and have opposing points of view. They belong to different generations, different genders. They're different in a lot of significant ways. How do you slide between those points of view?
I always like to say that my characters possess me. They take over and start writing themselves. So I remember in Those Living Cages, I have a factory worker, auntie in her 40s. And, when I wrote that, I was like, okay, I am now the factory worker auntie in my 40s. And I used to take the bus with a lot of those aunties. And then it just came, the words just came. I thought about how they would say things. And, I'm a very observant listener when I sit in places like the bus, or if I go to restaurants, or if I'm just around people at home or parties and stuff. So I always pick up how people say things, their cadences and stuff like that. So then I will piece together the characters in that way.
I have a theory that if you did a character test of all writers, that the one thing that we all have in common is that people watching.
Yeah.
That put us on a bus and we start making up stories about the people on the bus. I think that's the key thing that we have in common. I wanted to ask you, your background's in history. You must have been tempted when you started writing to write historical fiction.
Oh, no. No.
Oh, really?
Because I know the amount of research that has to go into historical fiction. And I actually abandoned my second novel, which was a historical fiction piece. And I was like, no, I spend too much time in the archive. No, I can't. No. And
that wasn't fun for you, because we've spoken to historical fiction writers and they love that research and they love that part of it.
It wasn't fun because then I never actually got to the writing because I was so like fascinated with all the reading and like all the different ideas, and now, it overwhelmed me. so yeah, but in my current writing, I am addressing characters who've lived through apartheid and their traumas and how it sort of influenced their post-apartheid lives. Okay. So I am dipping into it, but it's more based on, people that I have known and the stories they've told me instead of like going into the archive.
Yeah, not far away history, recent history, still alive history.
The colored community is plagued by a lot of stereotypes, as you have touched on. And when you are telling the stories of that community and you're aware of these stereotypes, are you deliberately trying to write in opposition to the stereotypes or add nuance to the stereotypes? How do you see your relationship with pre-existing stereotypes that have been established by the media, by other fictions, other authors?
So for me, I want to write the lived experience in how I have experienced it and how people around me have experienced it. And whether that is in opposition to the stereotype or flows with the stereotype, what then happens is, because I try to write the lived experience with as much nuance as possible, in some cases it becomes an explainer for certain behaviors, and in some cases it then runs in direct opposition to the stereotype. So I don't go in with this, like, I'm about to write my community against the stereotype. But I realize that in just writing the people as they are, it then starts addressing the stereotypes.
You talked right at the beginning about polishing short stories. And that's been sitting in my brain ever since you said it. And I want to know what that process looks like. How does one go? So how rough is your first draft? How much polishing happens? And what is it? Language polishing? Is it story polishing? What does it look like?
So I always say, even with like a novel, your first draft, you're vomiting out the plot. You just literally have to get the plot out. What happens in the beginning, the middle, and the end. And then when you go back, you start coloring in and, giving some more dialogue, describing the places a bit more. And what I've learned in my master's now is to literally like zoom into a scene, and really describe the minute movements of the characters and things like that, because it almost like brings you into the world. So those things get done in the second and the third draft, where you're literally like putting in more color, and then you see your word count go up.
I'm interested in that because when I write a short story, which happens very seldom, it feels hard to get into the gaps to write more detail, because I feel like I've crafted a perfectly tight nugget of wonder the first time round. How do you force yourself to mess with your perfectly tight nugget of wonder and get into those gaps? Do you just make yourself, or does it feel natural to you?
For me, it's always felt natural, because every time, like when I reread, I'm one of those like over editors, like, when you never stop and somebody actually has to tell you stop, or your deadline has to tell you stop. Because I'll always go back and reread it and be like, oh, I could put this in more. This person could say this, or, So, it has never been difficult for me to go back in and reread. I actually have to like pull myself away from trying to tinker with my work.
And as someone who has a corporate job and is a parent and runs a household, when is your writing time? What does your writing process look like on a daily basis when you are writing towards a deadline?
So I try to write a lot on the weekends, and a lot at night, like after everybody's gone to sleep. I used to be an insomniac before I got a chronic illness. But now I write whenever I have energy. So I'll make use of those energy days. And the nice thing about working from home is you can write in your lunch break. You can write at like 2:00 if you don't have a meeting, and then you just work those hours back at night. So I try to be as like flexible as possible. And with my son, I'm also like a stay-at-home / working parent. So it's like homework and this and making food. But I have a lot of support from my, spouse and my, mom as well. So they always like supporting and yeah.
And do you not find, because the challenge I found after having kids was that nighttime stops being a time that you can work? Are you not exhausted at the end of the day? I think I'm trying to find out from people how not to be exhausted at the end of the day.
So before I got an autoimmune disease, I was an insomniac. So literally, like, I would work from like 12 till 3 and then go sleep and then wake up. Now I'm pushed by 9, like I'm gone. Yeah. And then I wake up like at 6, and then when I get my son into the bus from 7 till like work starts at 9, I'll try and get in some writing or even some reading in that time. Yeah.
Terry, we always like to ask our guests what they have been reading or watching or listening to lately that's made an impression on them.
So I've been going back. I used to love musicals. My friend in varsity introduced me to like Chicago and the producers and those type of musicals. So I've been listening to the soundtracks on Spotify and singing along to them. So that's been me. And then I've actually been watching a lot of, Mike Flanagan horror, mini limited series on Netflix, because what I'm writing leans towards that. So it's been very interesting to like watch it. And it was on the advice of my supervisors. They were like, if you look at how horror plays out in film, everything is stretched out to create that suspense. So it's actually been helping me with my writing. And then I've been reading quite a lot, so much that I can't even remember what I've been reading. A lot of it is my classmates' work and some of the stuff that gets recommended for school. So yeah, it's been quite a lot.
And when you're reading your classmates' work and you know that they're going to be reading your work and criticizing you, have you felt more comfortable to be more critical, to sort of bring that critical eye on them?
I always feel so bad. I feel really bad. So I always try to like start off with like the good and to be very complimentary. And then I'll be like, okay, but I think that you could have done this and this and this. And I find my classmate is more like adept at giving that constructive criticism and buying me a coffee afterwards. Then I am. But she's a sweetie and she's really, really nice. So I know that whatever she's saying it very much in love. Yeah.
So it's just the two of you?
Yeah.
So that's quite intense.
Yeah.
I mean, that's different from a group of you and a group of different inputs. That's a very intense, very intimate experience.
It's been really cool. I've actually really enjoyed it because you have like the full attention of your classmate, of your supervisors. And it's just, yeah, I've just had so much fun with this experience. I think I would have been way more nervous if there was like a large group of people. Yeah, definitely. And we become friends and we respect each other. So I think that's the most important thing, that we really respect each other and each other's point of view. And we're very different people. My classmate is white. So we're very different people from different backgrounds, but we have our things that bind us together. So yeah.
Well, Terry, we hope that everyone checks out Those Who Live in Cages and White Chalk, and we are very much looking forward to the collection of short stories that emerges from this master's program. I think that's going to be great. But thank you for coming in, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me, guys.
Thank you.
Gail, I already knew Terry-Ann from having gone to a book fair with her, and I was so excited to talk to her today. Isn't she as lovely as I promised?
She is even lovelier than you promised. Because I don't know her at all. I knew of her, but I've never spoken to her. And I think maybe because of where she stands in the activism space, I kind of thought she was going to be a very serious person. And I'm very frightened of serious people. And she was just delightful and funny. And the conversation went on after we stopped recording, and she was even funnier. And I've had such a good time today.
What did you take from what she said?
I think you might have picked up that I am fascinated by the whole short story thing. Mm-hmm. And for me, I think that advice about having a theme for your short story collection.
The golden thread.
The golden thread of the short story collection. I think that was really useful advice for someone looking to do a short story collection, which I'm not currently looking to do, but I have a fantasy that I'm going to be looking to do it. I don't know that will ever come to anything, but I think it's really, really clever, good advice. So I enjoyed that. What about you?
I was interested in what Terry has learned from doing her MA in creative writing, and how a supervisor said to her, "Oh, you write first person all the time. Why do you shy away from the third person?" And I think you responded, Gail, that, well, what's wrong with writing first person? But I think it has to do with being pushed out of your comfort zone as a writer. We all have the things that we are very, very comfortable writing, and the things that we feel a sense of dread if we know that kind of thing is coming up. And I've been trying to think, what is it for me that I don't like writing or don't feel comfortable writing? I think I'm not at my happiest with descriptive scenes. Yeah. I'm happier with action and dialogue and moving the plot forward. And sort of talking about what the valley looks like is not my happy place. Yes. I'm not great at that. And very often I'll write it and I'll think, oh, that wasn't so bad. And then I'll go back and cut that entire paragraph.
I'm 100% with you. And it was interesting because we often talk to writers who are petrified of first person.
Yes.
It's a thing that either you are or you aren't. I love first person and I love dialogue.
Right.
And I also am not good at describing the valley. The valley in my books will remain undescribed. In fact, you might not even know you're in a valley, even though I know exactly where I am.
Yeah.
I might not bother to share it with the reader. So, yeah, very, very interesting. And I do think there is value. I've had a lot of fun writing in third person, which is harder for me. I've had a lot of fun playing with tenses.
Yes.
I do think there is value in pushing yourself.
I do indeed. And do you have advice for our listeners this week?
So it also relates a little bit to what Terry-Ann was saying, that she's having to learn more about writing on demand, not waiting for the mood. And I listened to a podcast this week because I haven't only been doing Marriage at First Sight. I listened to a podcast where they spoke to, it was Writer's Routine, which I love. And they spoke to it was an early episode from no, it wasn't Writer's Routine. I'm telling lies. It was the Bestseller Experiment. And it was an early episode. And they wrote to a best-selling writer called Shannon Mayer, who's self-published fantasy writer and prolific. But Fiona makes you look so lazy, and we all know you are not lazy. Like, she's one of those insane prolific writers.
Yes.
And she said, and people might not like the wording, and she apologized, so I will apologize for her. She said, the muse is your bitch.
Right.
You cannot wait for the muse. You cannot be a slave of the muse. You sit down and you make the muse come.
Yeah.
And you write. And we've talked about this a lot, but I think it cannot be said enough. And I think it's interesting because it's a lesson Terry-Ann is learning now.
Yes.
But you just can't that, and especially if you are a person writing with other commitments in your life, tame the muse.
Make the muse do your bidding.
Exactly. And I think we say it a lot in different ways, but it can't be said enough.
I quite agree. So if our listeners have read any of Terry-Ann's writings, if they are interested in what we had to say during this episode, if you have made the muse your bitch and want to tell us how, we'd love you to get in touch. We are on all social media across the board, and we look forward to hearing from you.
You've been listening to another production from Solid Gold Podcasts.